Please put your hands together for Tabitha Moore, representing Bennington, Vermont, in the Vermont House of Representatives.
My defeat is what they want, my acquiescence is what they need. My life is mine to create, and I will rise.
In 2014, I became the second African-American woman elected to the Vermont State Legislature in state history. In 2018, I made the difficult decision to leave my position to better protect and care for my family in an ever-growing environment of racial hostility and violence in our state. In one of the most politically progressive and whitest states in the nation, Vermont is not immune to issues of racism, bigotry, and discrimination any more than anywhere else in this country. How can we transform this nation? By transforming our brave little state to become an example of systemic anti-racism. If any state can turn it around, I believe that Vermont is up to that challenge. Join me as we meet Vermonters from across the state to learn more about how we can make the societal changes that are necessary to undo racism in the Green Mountain State. Do it now, because we need it. Do it now, because the world cannot wait. So on our very first episode of Color Lines in the Green Mountains, I am thrilled to be able to have with me today Tabitha Moore, the founder and president of Vermont's first NAACP chapter. Now, Tabitha has an intriguing and captivating story as a Black woman raised in Vermont, born and raised in one of our most rural communities, who's risen to incredible prominence through so much adversity to speak for and stand for, fight for and listen to the needs of our communities of color and those within the global majority throughout the state. The work that has happened through her hands is nothing short of incredible, and her insights and her passion for justice is something that we're all fortunate to be able to bear witness to. I'm so excited to be able to have her join us and share with us more about how we can continue the work that needs to happen and where we need to go from here. So Tabitha, my sister.
Hi, Kaya.
So here we are. It's 2020. We're in the midst of a global pandemic that's rocked our state. We are seeing ripples happening throughout the world, a sea change that's really pushing folks to talk about what's happening with Black lives, what's happening with marginalized communities across the globe. And here in Vermont, we're seeing some things changing. But we also have a history that we still need to reckon.
Oof, yes, we do.
And some of that history it lives and has been embodied in your particular story, in your particular spirit. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about what that feels like to have been the child who's grown up in this world and now seeing as this woman and as this leader where things have or have not changed.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot happening. You're not wrong there, and I feel like we're at this kind of precipice where if this is to evolve in a way that is peaceful, that people in majority positions, white people, heterosexual people, if they don't start to get it now, it will come to an end, but it will not be peaceful. So I feel like all of the things that you just named that are happening are parts of that kind of pushing us toward the edge and what are we going to do? And looking back on my own experience here in Vermont, I'm so thrilled. First of all, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. And I'm so grateful for you and for other Black and brown leaders around our state who are stepping up and doing incredible work. Growing up here, I never, ever would have imagined any of this to be possible here. And I never imagined myself back here, in large part because of what I experienced growing up as a young brown person. Like so many other Black and brown Vermonters who grow up here, there is a way in which you're both hyper-visible and invisible that can kill you, it can destroy you, it can eat at your soul every single day. And at some point, you come to kind of this crossroads where you have to decide, am I going to fade into the background to try to survive? Or am I going to use this hyper-visibility as a platform to highlight what's happening to our people and to demand change and to usher in that change and work with others to create it. I think you know which one I decided, which one I decided to take. It's been difficult. Growing up here, it was my brother and I, we were not born here. I am a 6th generation Vermonter, but my mom was in the military in the 70s, shortly after Loving versus Virginia passed. And she and my father married interracially. They had to pay extra for their marriage license, and my birth certificate is wrong because it says that both my parents are white, because back then that was just the assumption, regardless of whatever the child looked like, that was what they did. So even on my first day of birth, the seeds of racism just quickly implanted into my being in a way that let me know that it was not the norm. When my parents got together, my mom was in the Army and my uncle was in the Navy, and his naval superior wrote to my mother's Army superior. I have the letter. She gave it to me a couple years ago, and it was just awful, the ways that it talked about how Black men prey on young white women, and that he needed to do everything he could to stop my mother from marrying my father. And that was my uncle's view. And when you have that in your family, there are other ways in which that racism becomes insidious in your life. And like I said, you have to make a decision at some point whether you're going to let it swallow you and tear you up, or whether you're going to use it as fuel to create that fire and that passion to change it and make it different.
So thinking about that, so as a mother of Black children, what are the things that you have seen that are different for them than were for you? And where are we still falling short on our youth?
I left Vermont in 1996 after I graduated high school, never coming back, never having kids, never getting married. So in 2009, moved back with my now ex-husband and then our 2 children to my hometown, because I'm really good at eating crow. If I'm going to have a little bit, I might as well have it all. And I did it especially for the purpose of being a beacon or creating something different for people of color here. And my kids are, lighter skinned. And what I've noticed since I've been back in 2009 is that technology is certainly helping kids to have more access to resources to deal with the same bullshit that I dealt with as a child. So I would say on one hand, technology is making it easier for kids to connect and find resources, but they're still having to deal with the same exact things that I did as a child. I think what's different is that there are more kids, more enlightened white folks in the area than there were when I was a child. And because of that, they are starting to push things more. So the ugliness that the North often snubs their noses at the South for having is happening here now. We're just behind the times because white people in Vermont for so long have been allowed to pretend that racism was an issue because they would negate our identities. That's that hypervisibility and visibility thing. They would make us invisible whenever we spoke about things that made them uncomfortable. And that's certainly happening now. My eldest is raising the Black Lives Matter flag at her high school, which is the same high school I attended, which makes me incredibly proud. And she has experienced a spate of hate and racism and ignorance. I mean, grown people attacking a 17-year-old child over a flag because they feel uncomfortable, because they have misconceptions and misperceptions and don't want things to change. And I have a feeling that had I been that brave or had people around me to provide those resources, there was no NAACP, there was no ACLU. I mean, the ACLU may have been here, but they certainly weren't focused on racial justice in Vermont. There's no Justice for All or Black Lives Matter. None of that existed. But had it, and I tried to do the same things, I have a feeling that I would have been met with very similar disdain. But again, luckily, there are enough woke white people trying to get their cousins, because really this is about white people figuring it out. This is not about us. This is about us protecting ourselves while they get their shit together. Let's be honest. when people talk about the world is evolving, it's not us. We've known for hundreds of years what the problem is. They are just starting to recognize and believe us when we say that that's the problem. And I think, kids today they're just not having it. They are not here for respectability politics. Mm-hmm. They are not here for our sense of you'll get it when you're older. They're digital natives. They have ways of understanding the world that we just don't. And that's why I'm so glad that so many of our movements are youth-led right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about a sea change that's happening. Where is it not happening? How are the changes not taking place? And how do you feel? What do you feel is the reticence that Vermonters are holding that's keeping that from being more widespread?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's white Vermonters. Mm-hmm. Because Black Vermonters, brown Vermonters are eager. We've been dying for this change to happen. So when I think about where it's not happening and why it's not happening, I consider the nature of systemic oppression, the nature of systemic racism, and the fact that the system is always designed to protect itself. And so for white folks, particularly those who are in hold systemic power, to go against that system is to go against everything they've been taught. When I think about things like patriotism, when I think about things like community, the ways that we've kind of developed definitions around those that include making sure that we uphold laws, whether they're just or not, and then rely on a system of justice that is incredibly unjust, that was built upon slavery. I think it comes from either a lack of understanding that's what's really at play here. I think it comes from a fear of what's going to happen when we dismantle and deconstruct those systems. I think it comes from discomfort in the process of not knowing and for doing something different. Because when we go with Indigenous and Black and other ways of knowing and of being in relationship with each other, it's very uncomfortable for white folks to put themselves in those places because it requires a lot of vulnerability. When you think about those systems of supremacy, such as patriarchy, that say that boys can't cry, or that emotion is considered emotions other than anger and rage that are channeled, into aggression or assertiveness in the business place. When you think about the ways that this requires people to be present, people become very uncomfortable because there's a lot of grief and pain and loss that has happened to all of us. That only some of us are paying attention to because we're forced to. I think people are afraid of the process of healing, of reconciliation. People are afraid of what it means, what reparations means. It's like when I think about things like defund the police and why people are afraid of it. When you break it down, when you talk to people in law enforcement and you say things like, do you feel like you have a reasonable amount of work to do? 99% of people say, absolutely not. We're being asked to do too much. Right. Well, let's talk about that mandate and what that means. And I think with responsibility come resources. And if we're taking that responsibility, we have to take those resources that go with it in order to make that work. And I think when we break it down to its most simple form, a lot of it does come down to fear of the unknown or fear of losing power. White people are afraid of pro-Black movements because pro-white movements have always been anti-Black. And that doesn't pay attention to the contextual fact that Black people are just trying to survive. We're not trying to outdo. We're not trying to take resources that white people need to survive. We're just trying to take what we need. We're just trying to, be on equal footing. And I think white people don't understand that. They just assume everybody's on equal footing.
So what does that mean for Black folks who are trying to survive? When we're saying that communities of color, people from the global majority, because sometimes even using the phrases of people of color still centers a whiteness. It centers whiteness as the norm, and the rest of us are trying to get into that space.
I love global majority.
And so, it's the fact. It's actually a literal fact.
Yeah.
And considering that, thinking about what all of that means. So for Vermonters who are here in this overwhelmingly white space, how are we surviving? I'm not yet ready to talk about how we're thriving. I'd love to get there, and we will get there, but What does that mean? Because you're hearing through your role that
Mhm,
you've played, through the many different positions that you hold within the state, you're seeing and hearing firsthand from folks the ways that they're trying to just make it to the next day. What is that like for folks? What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
It's incredibly difficult for people of the global majority in Vermont to have hope when we keep seeing white people making the same mistakes over and over again. Call us to the table, ask us what to do, ignore what we say, justify it by upholding principles and practices of systemic racism. And it's so frustrating, and it's difficult for us to remain here because of that. So where do we find hope? How do we survive? We try to find each other. And like I said, in high school, young people growing up here who find themselves in that catch-22 of hypervisibility and invisibility come to that place, that crossroads, where they have to decide whether they're going to use it as a platform or whether they're going to try to blend in and just survive. And I think the same thing happens to us as adults, that we come to that crossroads where it's like, how many more times am I going to come to the table with the white people who aren't paying me to be here, who aren't going to listen to me, who are just going to tell me all the systemic reasons why they won't step out of their comfort zone. So am I going to keep coming to the table and doing that? Or am I going to retreat and protect myself and just try to live my life? And I feel like that's something that we deal with over and over again. So many of us don't want to step into the light to do this work on a larger level because they know what the price is.
What is that price?
How does that? You and I have both
physically?
Right?
I know, right? We've seen it.
The price. I'm losing my hair still. Actually, it's starting to come back. The last year and a half, I've lost about a third of my hair as a manifestation of this stress of running this branch of the NAACP and listening to our stories and the pain over and over and over again, and coming into connection with white folks who may be well-meaning but aren't thinking about real radical systemic change that is outside of their purview. Many of us end up with mental health issues. Some of us just leave because we're not going to do that to ourselves. We isolate. We become suspicious of each other and of ourselves. It's all of the things that happen during crisis happen to us because it's like you're constantly in crisis when you live here.
Yeah. It's that sense of where are the spaces of peace, which is hard to find because you don't find them in the workforce. You get pushed out of the workforce. You get chased out of the workforce because once you do, you're brought in for your novelty on some levels to say, hey, we're trying to diversify. We're trying to learn more. But then as that difficult work starts, even in just acknowledgement that it exists and that there are inequities within workspaces, that there are clear inequities in how youth are treated, depending on their race or social status.
That's right.
Recognizing that it's happening in every facet of one's environment. I mean, even within the community that I reside in, I remember speaking with a Black woman who was on the verge of purchasing, very close to actually where I live. And on the day that they were coming to come look at the property again, on a second run of inspection, they get pulled over by the law enforcement, who starts interrogating them about, where are you from? Are you from in the state? How long have you been here? And all these things where they're saying, I'm not actually obligated to give you all of this information, and I'm just trying to live my life. And so it's this constant interruption of the ability to just live one's life.
Right.
When I first stepped into politics and started speaking very openly about what was happening with racism in the state, there were a lot of folks from the global majority, even within my community, who didn't see it as a problem. Much of it, I felt, was because they found ways to survive and try to maintain some levels of invisibility. But then when everything really broke loose in my story and the proof started becoming so much more glaring that racism was there, that the police were policing differently, that their children were experiencing different experiences in schools. I've heard statistics around the fact that the number of POC-owned businesses in this state has grown exponentially. And I personally attribute that because people are being pushed out of the workforce. Or they're leaving to say, I need to be able to have the ability to feed my family and have it not based on someone's arbitrary use of power.
Yep.
and determination that I don't belong.
Right.
Is that something that resonates for you? And how do you think that has changed as far as Vermonters from the global majority stepping into their voice and talking very clearly and identifying, having an ability to identify what systemic racism feels like for them?
I think, I have so many answers to that. I think, the first one that comes to mind is how what happened to you shifted the conversation for Black and Brown people, BIPOC in Vermont. I think we realize that we cannot stay silent. We cannot just stay in our little, bubbles and try to just survive anymore, because the ways in which you were attacked felt so familiar to so many of us. And because you were public, many people could, it was almost like a Me Too moment almost for Vermonters, people like us. And people could not ignore the ways that what was happening to you resonated, the pain that was happening within so many of us. On my own personal journey, I went back to my high school to work as a school counselor because I thought it was so important for kids to have somebody whispering and shouting that you matter, you're visible, you're loved, hang on, like it doesn't have to be like this. I promise you there's more out there. While there are still the people that are whispering the things like they did to you, like, shh, you gonna get us caught. Be quiet. We all have to deal with it. It's like, and I say that, somewhat in jest, but that's exactly what we do to each other, because that's what we've done for centuries. And some say it's out of love, but a lot of the times it's out of that need for survival and that desire to not see the pain. But going back to Mill River, I was eaten alive again. And, when you talk about why we leave the workforce, it's because we are novelties. As you said, they see us as people that can come in and, make them look like they're woke, make them look like they're getting it, give them a little bit of taste of maybe as much as they'll take, and then pummel you and throw you out to the side and blame you for leaving. I mean, it's incredible. And so I think when people saw what was happening to you, they couldn't ignore that was their story too. And I feel like it was happening at a time when Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, we're all dying globally. And in Vermont, between increased access through technology and what was happening to you and what was happening to all of us, Vermont's Black and Brown populations finally said, we can't stay like this. And the election of Trump and, like I said, that's that precipice. We are there. And right now, what we do in Vermont is so critical to creating a roadmap for the national narrative, which is why I'm so glad you're doing this, because Vermont is majority white. And if we can't make progress here in this place that's allegedly progressive, we're in a whole lot more trouble than anyone can imagine.
So let's talk about that then. So since that moment, there has been a visible sea change in attempts to try to correct this. So we've seen everything from policies to programs to declarations to murals painted on the sides of streets. What are some of the things that you're seeing right now that you find the most promise in? And what are still some of the challenges that we need to correct to ensure that they'll actually deliver on what they're purporting to do?
I mean, as you're listing them, I hear white, 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 white. The way that they're trying to make the changes in the way that they know how. They're not listening. They're not following. They're not doing the directives of those of us who have been harmed by systemic racism, by white supremacy. I think if we are to do better, we must not only listen to us, not only bring us to the table, but when we say this is the path, it's not about creating another sit-down forum in your image, Attorney General Donovan. It's about having a restorative justice approach to talking about and addressing these things. We lead it, not you. You have led, and you're leading us down a terrible path. And that's not just the Attorney General, obviously. It's kind of business as usual. So I think if we're to do it better, it must be led by Indigenous ways of knowing. And I think that that requires a great deal more emphasis and focus on healing what has been done to the Abenaki here. I think that's where we really do need to start. And I know that sounds, pie in the sky to a lot of people, but
when you think about the plight of the Abenaki, when you think about what's happening with them, and it's not just, again, our lives are not just about our struggles, but they are also about our triumphs. But what that means for a state that is new to this work, and even new to acknowledging its indigenous population here.
Right.
I mean, they were just given recognition in 2008.
Right. And then they just got the right to fish and hunt on their lands for free.
They don't actually have sovereignty.
Right.
Over lands.
Right. Right. And again, so when we talk about a state that's new, it's only the white people that are new to this. The fact that indigenous people, Black people, immigrant people, those of us who have been subjugated within this system have thrived. We survive, and then there are pieces of our culture that thrive. That's where we need to be focused on. How do we do that? How have we been able to resist that darkness into which we are thrust, as Adrienne Rich said? I feel like that's where the answer is. I think we need to stop looking for the answer in public policy. I think we need to stop looking for the answer in colleges and universities that are built on white supremacy, and look to the indigenous people, look to the people who are, who are dealing with this, and build it anew from a restorative approach, which again is born of the indigenous people of New Zealand and of Australia. And see what develops from there. And I think that that's hard for us to use what Adrienne Marie Brown would call emergent strategy. That is to get in a room, use a different process that isn't built in white supremacy, and use that process to field what comes next, rather than our typical agendas and 12-point plans and all of that.
So when policy falls short, why does it often fall short?
Because they're not listening. They don't listen to us. They listen, they hear us, but they can only take in so much of what we say because it bumps up against their own personal values, their own fear, their own understanding, or their ability to take in and really absorb what's happening. And or it bumps into the system that is designed to protect itself. All of these systems are designed to protect white supremacy. I was just talking with a friend recently about how the Nazis looked at U.S. laws and the ways that they were built, right? As a way to develop their system for eradicating Jewish people. And some of our laws were too harsh, right? I mean, when you look at that as the basis for our system, and we
see that in other countries too. That happened in South Africa.
Absolutely.
That happened in Rwanda. They said, let's take the best practices of the worst work of what's happened in the United States and find ways to be able to use that to create our own systems of power, subjugation, domination, and control. So when I think about the systems that fail, something that often comes to mind to me is the urgency that comes from white supremacy. So when I think about how policy fails, it's because it has a mandate for immediate results, for immediate responses, and an unrealistic expectation sometimes.
And measurable by white standards.
It has to be, everything has to be data driven. How, and we know that does that resonate for our people at all?
No, because those systems are, even our scientific system is based on white values. Even standard, like I've been getting much more into this, as I approach my dissertation, and I'm like, none of this makes any sense to me. This does not make sense as a way to understand human relationships and human suffering and human behavior. So when those are the standards by which we measure progress, we will always fall short, because you cannot measure human suffering through the eyes of those who are doing the damage, through the eyes of the oppressor. And like I said, that's why I'm looking at, when policies fail, it is like you said, because it's a system of white supremacy. It's systems, professionalism. They're all designed to subjugate and control everyone, but in particular, weed out those who don't think or act or believe the ways of the system. And then we're seen as unprofessional. We're seen as unpatriotic. We're seen as unwilling to work together. We're not seen as not being team players, but what we're doing is holding on to our value, our cultural value humanity in all of its forms, and not just those narrow few that mitigate resources. So yeah, I have a lot of feelings about the way that we try to fix things through policy. And I mean, we're seeing it again right now. The way that they keep, I mean, in the NAACP, I feel like a large part of our role is that when we see policy being pushed and prodded and shaped through these lenses that are nearly useless, which is, they've been pretty useless. We're still 400 years later using the same system, or 200 years later trying to use the same system to fix the same problems, and it's not working. It's not about rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's about getting on a different ship and sailing, in a different way. I mean, like I'm at the point now where I testify rarely because it's almost, it's a joke. I come in and I do my dog and pony show. I plead to you. I, stand on the pulpit and beg you to understand that our lives matter and that we deserve better. And I'm not going to do that anymore. So I look at people like the leaders of Black Lives Matter Greater Burlington. I have so much respect for like Katrina Battle and the ways that she's like, nope, I'm going to focus on taking care of us. And I look at Mark Hughes and Justice for All, and wow, I mean, he just he will power through. I mean, he is still trying to fight the good fight with policy to try to create space for us to do something different within that. And then I look at like the ACLU and how they continue to call out and name within the system because they have skills that, many of us don't. And then I see the NAACP in our role is to be like, you need to like stop using us for this, stop doing that with us, and follow these people. Follow them, follow us, follow them. So when I look at racial justice in Vermont, that's what I'm kind of seeing, because I mean, even since 2016, the number of groups, Peace and Justice Center, you have showing up for racial justice. I mean, Peace and Justice Center's been around for a while, but those are white-led groups who are trying to mirror or support what we're saying. So I'll be very curious to see over the next 5 years how we're able to create that change, if we are.
So creating that change, one of the things that I love to say, and I feel this deeply in my bones, is that this work that we're trying to do, so even if it is in the realm of policy, if we're talking about trying to deal with our environmental crisis, it is on the bodies of those of the global majority that are most negatively impacted by, across the globe, by our environmental crisis. So any work that's being done to address the environmental crisis must be centered on our needs. This work is for us.
Right.
It's not for us to do, but it's for us.
Right.
We didn't cause it.
Right.
We're suffering from it.
Yeah.
And that work must work in service of us and healing us. And so to do that, what are some of the spaces or places that you feel would help to heal us? Where are the spaces and places where we can find joy and we can find peace? I think of so many different initiatives that are happening right now, from the land reclamation efforts and the Black farming initiatives that are happening all across the state right now. What's something that's making your heart sing a little when you see that that good work that is being done and being led by our folks?
Right. Clemens Family Farm, Lydia Clemens right now is trying to start K-12 curricula about, Black and brown lives and excellence and arts and everything that we contribute to this world. And she's doing a phenomenal job with that. One of the things that we're trying to do through our branch of the NAACP is put together ongoing regular retreats for Black women that are in Black spaces, facilitated by Black and brown folks, so that we can just see and be with each other. I mean, people don't think about the way that Vermont's landscape exists in terms of Black and brown people. Black and brown people fled here. So natural communities did not form. That was intentional, so that we would not be caught by the slave catchers who became law enforcement. So right now we're trying to create those spaces and places around the state so that we can just be with each other. I feel like that's the first step is, like Celie and them in Color Purple, when they meet in the field, and I'm like, oh, right? Right? Like we need that moment where we feel joy just being able to be in the room. And I know Ebony Freedom has tried several times to do that for Black women in Vermont as well. And I think we need to keep creating those opportunities just for us to be together. But it is so difficult with such a large state and such tiny population. So it's like, how do we create these communities? I feel like that's where we are here.
That's where we are. But I believe that that's where we can become.
Absolutely.
And I'm so glad that you're in this. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you.
I'm so excited to have this conversation, and I'm so grateful for everything that you do. Please bring it in. Thank you, sister.
Wake up.